The wheels of the stagecoach ground to a halt in a cloud of dust and brittle winter air. Sarah Millen stepped down, her boots landing on cracked, frozen dirt, clutching a small trunk that held everything she owned. Her fingers, red from the cold, gripped the worn leather handle as she looked up at Dry Creek, a town smaller, harsher than she'd imagined from the carefully written letters she'd received. No welcome party waited, only a handful of townsfolk staring from shaded porches, their faces unreadable, save for the woman near the general store who shook her head and turned away. Sarah adjusted her shawl, her breath visible, and walked with purpose toward the tall man leaning against the rail outside the saloon. Russell Pike. She recognized him instantly. He matched the description in his letters: tall, broad, a thick coat stretched over his frame, and a black hat low over his brow. He didn't move, didn't smile. She offered a tentative nod, heart pounding harder than the rattling coach wheels had. "Mr. Pike?" she asked, voice firm though her hands trembled. His eyes traveled slowly from her face to her feet, lingering too long at her waist. He pushed off the rail and took a step closer, his lip curling in something close to a sneer. "You Sarah?" "I am." She tried to meet his eyes, willing warmth into her voice. You wrote me, sir." He didn't answer right away, just looked past her at the trunk still sitting on the street. A man laughed nearby. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in that dusty square pressing on her, waiting. Pike spat on the ground. "You didn't say you were this big," he said, his voice loud, flat, like he was remarking on the weather. A sharp chill ran through her, but she stood her ground. "I never claimed to be small," she replied steady. "You're too fat. I don't need someone who's gonna eat more than she's worth." He looked over his shoulder, making sure the others heard. A few chuckled. "I need a wife, not a burden." Sarah's chest tightened. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't move. The silence stretched. Russell took another step, lowering his voice enough that only she could hear. "I ain't marrying no woman who can't keep herself fit for work. I sent for a wife, not a cow." She didn't speak. Her throat closed tight. The stagecoach behind her creaked as it prepared to leave. She looked back, knowing it was her only way out, but it was already pulling off, slow and unforgiving, wheels slicing into frozen dirt. "You'll want to find somewhere else," Russell said, already turning back toward the saloon. "Ain't no place here for someone like you." He didn't look back. The doors swung shut behind him. Sarah stood still, the cold biting through her shawl, her trunk sitting abandoned like a broken promise. One by one, the townsfolk returned to their business. The woman near the store shook her head again and disappeared inside. A dog barked in the distance, but no one came to her aid. She walked to her trunk, sat down on it, and folded her hands in her lap. Her breath came slower now, visible in the fading light, steady as she watched the empty street. From across the way, a man leaned against the doorframe of the jailhouse, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Sheriff Caleb Rourke had watched the whole thing, motionless, silent. Sarah didn't notice him at first, nor the way he straightened slightly before stepping back inside without a word. The sun dipped lower, and the wind picked up. Sarah sat unmoving until the sky began to bruise purple with the coming night. Her hands were numb, her legs stiff, but she didn't cry. She didn't shiver. She simply waited. Footsteps approached, slow and heavy. She looked up to find the sheriff standing a few feet away, his coat dusted with snowflakes, his face carved from stone. "You plan on sitting there all night?" His voice was rough, not unkind. "Don't see where else I'd go," she answered, rising to her feet, slow, careful. He nodded once, glancing down at the trunk. "You'll freeze out here." "Likely." He turned without another word and walked toward the jailhouse. She hesitated, then followed, dragging the trunk behind her, the wood scraping softly against the dirt. The jailhouse was small, plain, warmer than she expected. He pointed upstairs. "Room's empty. You can stay till morning." She set her trunk down inside the door. "Thank you, Sheriff." He didn't respond, just pulled a chair near the stove and sat. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with something close to comfort. Sarah climbed the stairs, each step groaning beneath her weight, but she didn't mind. She didn't mind at all. The room was bare, a cot, a small table, and a cracked window that let in more cold than light. She sat on the edge of the bed and took off her boots, staring at the worn floorboards beneath her feet. No tears came. Only a quiet determination. She wasn't gone yet. Downstairs, Caleb poked at the fire, his eyes narrowing as he thought of Pike, of the town, of the woman upstairs who hadn't flinched once despite the weight of every stare. Morning came gray and sharp. Sarah descended the stairs to find Caleb already at the stove, coffee brewing in a battered tin pot. "You plan on staying?" he asked, not looking up. "Just long enough to earn fare out." She poured herself a cup, careful not to spill. "You work?" "I do." He nodded, still watching the fire. "Stables need mending. Jonas won't turn down help." She sipped the coffee, bitter but warm. "I'll see to it." He stood, reached for his hat. "You're not Charity. You pull your weight, you stay. I never asked for pity, Sheriff." "Good." He stepped out into the morning, leaving the door ajar. Sarah set the cup down and followed soon after, her breath thick in the air, her boots crunching softly as she walked. The town still watched, but she didn't feel small. She didn't feel seen. She felt real. And that was enough. The air inside the jailhouse was thick with silence. Sarah sat at the edge of the cot, her hands folded tight, knuckles white against her lap. The morning light spilled through the window in cold beams, catching the dust in the air, floating like things left unsaid. Below, she heard the steady creak of boots on wood, slow and deliberate. The sheriff didn't move fast, but he didn't have to. She could hear his weight in every step, every pause before the next. She hadn't slept. The cot was narrow, the room colder than she cared to admit. But it wasn't the chill that kept her awake, it was the stillness, the way this place seemed to hold its breath. She'd been in towns like this before, but none quite so hollow. Dry Creek had the look of a place that had seen too much and chosen to forget it all. Her stomach growled, a low, unkind sound. She ignored it, standing, brushing down her dress. The hem was worn, frayed at the bottom where dust and time had chewed it raw. She tied her shawl tighter, took a breath, and stepped downstairs. Caleb Rourke sat at the table near the stove, a small plate in front of him, the remains of bread and something that might have been eggs. He didn't look up as she entered, only nodded toward the stove where a pot rested, blackened from years of use. "There's some left," he said, voice flat. She poured herself a cup, the coffee strong enough to scald, bitter as she liked it. She drank without sugar, without milk, there was none to be had anyway. The warmth spread down her throat, chasing the night away. "Thank you," she said, setting the cup down. "You find work yet?" He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Not yet. Stables. Jonas said he'd take someone on for a bit." She nodded. "I'll go." He stood, grabbing his hat from the hook by the door. The scar on his hand caught the light, red and rough against his skin. She didn't ask about it. He didn't offer. Instead, he pulled the door open, letting the morning cold in with him. "Don't be late." And with that, he was gone. The town hadn't changed overnight. Faces still turned as she walked, whispers trailing behind her like old ghosts. Jonas was waiting at the stables, a tall man with more beard than face, arms thick from years of labor. "You the girl Caleb's put up?" he asked, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I'm Sarah Millen." He eyed her, the way a man eyes a mule he's not sure can pull the plow. Then he shrugged. "Don't care if you're fat or thin, long as you work. Tack room needs sorting. Feed's in the back. Stay out of the way, and we'll be square." She nodded once and set to it. Her hands were stiff at first, but she didn't complain. The smell of hay and sweat filled the air, familiar in its own rough way. The tools were scattered, feed bags torn open, mice having their fill. She cleaned, organized, patched what she could, fingers raw by midday. Jonas said nothing, only grunted once as he passed by, which she took as thanks enough. By the time she returned to the jailhouse, dusk had settled. Caleb was there, seated at the same table, his eyes distant. "You worked," he said, as if surprised. "Told you I would." He motioned to a loaf of bread on the table, a jar of something dark beside it. "Eat." She sat, breaking off a piece, chewing slowly. The jam was sour, but it filled her belly, which was enough. "Russell came by," Caleb said, not looking at her. Sarah's hands paused. "What did he want?" "Told me to put you out. Said you were a stain on the town?" "And?" "I told him no." Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, the only sound. "He'll keep pushing," she said finally. "Let him." She looked at him, really looked. His face was hard, lines etched deep from years of watching, waiting. But his eyes, beneath the shadow of his brow, held something, weariness, maybe, or something older. "You always this generous?" she asked. He snorted. "Ain't generosity. It's fairness. Most men wouldn't bother." "I ain't most men." She nodded, satisfied with that. Days passed like that, work, quiet meals, the occasional word shared. Sarah found herself fitting into the rhythm, not welcomed, but not ignored either. The town tolerated her presence, mostly because Caleb did. She noticed the way people looked at him, not with affection, but caution. Respect born of fear, not fondness. Jonas paid her in coin and bread. It wasn't much, but it added up. She stashed it in the folds of her trunk, counting each piece like a step closer to somewhere else. One evening, as she swept the floor of the jailhouse, Caleb returned with a gash above his brow, blood trickling down his temple. She dropped the broom and crossed to him. "What happened?" "Drunk with a knife. He's resting it off in the cell." She took a cloth, wet it, pressed it to the cut. He flinched, just a little. "You should be more careful." He met her eyes, something sharp there. "Man pulls a knife, you deal with it." She dabbed gently, the cloth turning pink. "Doesn't mean you have to bleed for it." He said nothing, letting her tend the wound in silence. Later, he sat by the fire, the cut stitched, a glass in his hand. Sarah sat across from him, mending a tear in her dress. "You think of leaving?" he asked, voice low. "Every day." "Why don't you?" "Money." He nodded. Took a drink. "You stay long enough, town forget you." She shook her head. "They don't forget. They just wait for you to give up." He looked into the fire, eyes distant. "Maybe." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Sarah set the needle down, her fingers sore. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Used to." "And now?" "Now I just wait." "For what?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Haven't figured that out." She stood, gathering the fabric, folding it neat. "Maybe we're both waiting for the same thing," she said softly. He didn't reply. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the room. Sarah climbed the stairs, the boards creaking underfoot. Caleb sat alone, the glass empty in his hand, the night pressing in. The first flakes drifted at dawn, soft as breath against the jailhouse window, but by sun-high they were slashing sideways, driven by wind that rattled every door and dry creak. Sarah felt the chill before she saw it. Her breath curled white in the stairwell, and the wooden steps complained beneath her weight as she hurried down to stoke the fire. She found Caleb already there, shoving fresh logs into the iron belly of the stove, jaw set tight. A thin halo of frost clung to the brim of his hat. He glanced at her reddened fingers. "Jonas'll have the horses stalled in. Best stay inside today." "I gave my word," she answered, pulling on her coat. "Storm or no storm, feed doesn't wait." Caleb's mouth twitched, either smile nor frown. He fetched his rifle from the rack and handed her a kerchief of jerky and bread. "Then I'll walk you over. Town's meaner when the weather is." They stepped onto the boardwalk, wind slicing through wool and cotton like thin knives. Snow already whitened the main street, muting every sound except the sighing gusts that shook loose shutters. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter, boots crunching as they crossed to the stables. Caleb's presence beside her felt like a silent wall, steady, unspoken protection. Inside, the horses stamped and snorted, uneasy at the rising howl outside. Jonas greeted them with a curt nod, frost in his beard, and passed Caleb a dented lantern. "Gang signs on the ridge road last night," he muttered. "Figures they'd come sniffing once this storm dropped a veil." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "Couldn't tell. Print was shallow, maybe half a dozen." Jonas glanced at Sarah. "You sure you want her here?" "I need the hands," Sarah answered before Caleb could. She grabbed a pitchfork, moved with calm purpose, shoveling straw, checking water buckets. Jonas watched her for a heartbeat, grunted approval, and turned to Caleb. "If Pike's paying them riders, you best be ready." "Pike's scared of his own echo," Caleb said, but Sarah heard the caution beneath the words. She felt it too, like a prickle at the base of her neck. Through a knothole in the wall she saw Russell Pike across the street, collar high against snow, talking to two strangers whose faces were lost in shadow. One slapped a saddlebag bulging with something heavy. The other spat, eyes never leaving the sheriff's office. Fear slid cold and thin down Sarah's spine. She kept working. For every bucket hauled, every stall raked, the wind shrieked louder, flinging pellets of ice against the stable roof. Afternoon light vanished behind a wall of swirling white. When Jonas called a halt, Caleb was already at the doors, rifle cradled, casual but ready. "Road's gone," he said. "Stay close." They fought the gale back to the jailhouse, shoulders bent. Snow had piled calf-deep. Drifts lapped at porch posts like rising tide. Inside, Caleb barred the door, checked the windows, moved with the economy of long habit. Sarah lit lamps one by one, their glow small but steady against encroaching dusk. She brewed coffee thick as mud, set half before him without comment. Caleb gripped the mug, eyes fixed on the frosted glass. "Town's running thin on kindness," he said quietly. "It was never flush with it." He huffed once, a sound that might have been a laugh on a warmer day. "Jonas says you're owed $2. She shrugged. "He'll pay when he can." Caleb set his cup down. "I can spare. I'm earning my keep, Sheriff. Not begging it." The words came sharper than she meant, but she didn't take them back. His gaze held hers, steady, no offense taken. Night pressed in. Snow thickened until the lamps felt swallowed by white noise. Caleb paced between window and stove, boots marking lines on the floor. Sarah darned a torn blanket, needle biting thread in tiny, determined stabs. "You always mend," he observed. "Can't afford to throw things out." He leaned against the wall, arms folded. "My wife did the same. Never wasted a scrap." He rarely spoke of her. The admission hung fragile in the close air. Sarah looked up, waiting. Caleb's eyes stayed on the snow beyond the glass. "I failed her," he said, voice low. "Fire took the house while I chased thieves 3 counties west. By the time I rode back, smoke was all that was left." He lifted scarred hands. "These came pulling beams off cinders that wouldn't give her back." Sarah set the blanket aside, fingers cold. No words felt fit for the charred weight he carried, so she offered silence, letting the crackle of burning pines speak instead. Caleb pushed away from the wall, restless as a caged horse. "Storm's a gift to men who trade in shadows," he muttered. "Wind masks bootsteps. Snow hides the blood. Then let's make sure none gets spilt," she said. He met her eyes again, and this time there was something resolute between them, forged without ceremony. Caleb moved to the cabinet, brought out a battered revolver. "Ever shoot?" "Once. Hit the tin can, missed the fence." He chuckled dry. "Good enough." He showed her how to load, how to keep her wrists straight. Her hands were steady, her breath even. When he nodded approval, a flicker of warmth uncoiled in her chest. A rap at the door cut through the moment. Caleb raised a finger, rifle poised. 3 slow knocks. Sarah's heartbeat thudded in her ears. Caleb slid the peephole open. Doc Mayfield's mustached face peered through. "Got a sick boy," he called over the wind. Need a place warm to set him. Caleb opened up. The physician stumbled in, carrying a child bundled in blankets, skin ash pale, eyes glazed. Pneumonia, Doc said. Mother passed last winter, father's drunk useless. Stove at my office died. Figured your fire's hotter. Caleb cleared a bunk in the corner. Sarah fetched water, stripped the boy's soaked mittens, rubbed his hands until color returned. She brewed willow bark tea, held the cup to cracked lips. The boy coughed, frail but alive. Doc eyed Sarah. Didn't think you had nurse's hands? Hands are hands, she answered. Heat and kindness don't ask skinny or fat. The doctor's cheeks reddened, not from cold. He busied himself adjusting the child's blanket. Caleb watched Sarah, something unreadable in his gaze, as though measuring her anew. Hours crawled. The storm pounded without mercy. Candles burned low. Sarah dozed upright beside the boy, waking each time his breath rattled. Caleb paced, checked the street, returned. Midnight came, cloaked in endless white. A gunshot cracked the silence, distant, muffled. Caleb flung on his coat. Stay with the boy, he ordered, but Sarah was already lacing her boots. I can shoot a tin can, she reminded him. He hesitated, then tossed her the revolver. Together they stepped into a world erased by wind. Snow slashed their faces, but the flare of flame guided them, fire licking at the side wall of Jonas's stable. Figures darted in and out, silhouettes against orange glow. Pikes hired guns, using kerosene and fear. Caleb raised his rifle, fired once. A man cried out, dropped behind a trough. Chaos scattered, hooves screamed within the burning stable, boards crackled. Sarah knelt, steadied her revolver on a water barrel, heart hammering. A gunman sprinted across her sideline, she squeezed. The shot whistled past his hat, close enough to send him diving. Caleb advanced, voice low and lethal. Drop the torch. The outlaw hesitated, torch sputtering in wind, then hurled it at Caleb's feet and ran. Caleb stamped the flame, snow hissing to steam. From the alley, Pike's voice rose thin with fury. She's poison, Rourke! Town dies if she stays! He emerged, pistol shaking. Sarah's blood went cold. Caleb aimed, but Pike kept Sarah in his line, forcing the sheriff's rifle up. Step away from her! Pike snarled, eyes wild. Sarah didn't move. Wind tugged her shawl, snow whitening her hair. Pike's finger tightened. Before the crack sounded, Jonas barreled from the smoke, shovel swinging. The pistol flew, clattered against a hitch post. Pike hit the snow hard, breath whooshing out. Jonas planted a boot on his chest. Stable's mine, fire's yours, he growled, cuffing Pike stupid. Caleb seized rope, bound Pike's wrists while Sarah and Jonas dragged water buckets, doused the licking flames until only blackened boards steamed in the dark. Sirens of wind wailed on. Caleb hauled Pike upright, shoved him toward the jailhouse. Arson! Attempted murder! He said over Pike's sputtered curses. Jonas followed, leading 2 singed horses, noses flaring white vapor. Inside, Doc looked up from the sleeping boy as Caleb pushed Pike into a cell. Sarah closed the heavy door, slid the bolt with a final, ringing clang. Pike's rage ricocheted off iron bars, but nobody answered. Caleb turned to Sarah, snow melting in his hair, soot streaking his face. He opened his mouth, found no words, closed it again. Instead, he reached, brushed soot from her cheek with the back of one scarred knuckle. The touch was brief, but it spoke all the things Dry Creek seldom said: gratitude, respect, the fragile start of something sturdy. She exhaled, long and steady, then moved to tend the horses tied outside the cell window, their flanks quivering after fire and frost. Caleb watched her work, saw the storm still raging beyond the glass, and felt, for the first time in a long while, that the night might break with dawn. Dawn seeped into Dry Creek the color of tarnished silver, dull light glancing off snow that had crusted overnight into glassy sheets. Inside the jailhouse, the fire had burned down to embers, but the room still held the scorched smell of alder and the sharper tang of smoke from Jonas's half-charred stable. Caleb stood at the stove coaxing flame back from coals, His shoulders squared as if he might lift the whole building by force of will. Sarah poured water into the blackened coffee pot, listening to the hiss as it met hot iron. Behind the bars, Russell Pike stirred on his cot, chains clinking. His swollen lip had split again during the night, and a smear of dried blood marred the stubble on his chin. He watched Sarah with fever-bright eyes, a smile too thin to be friendly. "Morning, sweetheart," he rasped, voice like gravel. "Town's turning on you. Hear it in the wind?" Sarah ignored him, set the coffee pot back, and joined Caleb at the table. Caleb's gaze lingered on Pike a moment, cool, detached, then he slid the tin cup toward her. She wrapped cold fingers around it. "Council's called a gathering," he said quietly. "Church at 9. Folks want answers." "Answers?" she echoed, letting the words settle. "They'll want you to turn me out." "They'll ask?" he agreed. She blew across the coffee, steam curling up. Outside, the wind had gone still, leaving a hush broken only by a board creaking somewhere along the porch. Calm like that never lasted. In frontier towns, quiet often meant the storm had simply lowered its head for the charge. Caleb rose, shrugging into his coat. "I'll meet Jonas first, see what feed survived. You stay put." "I'm not a prisoner," she said. His brow folded, not in anger, more in instinctive worry. "Didn't say you were. Just safer here till I know the mood." Russell laughed softly in the cell, a sound that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "Mood's black as coal, Sheriff. Men been drinking courage all night. Losing livestock, losing money. You think they won't trade one oafish bride for peace?" Caleb slammed the cell door with his palm so the clang drowned Pike's words. "You speak again, I'll gag you." He looked to Sarah, gentler. "Lock up behind me. Use that rifle if need be." She waited until his footsteps faded, then secured the bolt, testing it twice. Pike watched, amusement flickering. "You trust him far more than he trusts the town," Pike said. "I trust what I see," she answered, taking a rag to the stove lid. "He keeps his word. Something you wouldn't understand. Words cheaper than bullets," Pike muttered, lying back. "And bullets'll be plentiful by nightfall." Church pews groaned under the weight of townsfolk wrapped in patched coats, their breath little clouds in the unheated nave. Caleb hadn't taken 3 steps inside before whispers swept the room like grass fire. Jonas, wild-eyed from smoke and lost hay, gripped Caleb's arm. "They blame you," he said under his beard. "Say your charity drew blood. Say maybe you and the woman set the blaze for sympathy." Caleb's jaw worked, but he kept his tone even. "They saw her hauling buckets same as you. Truths don't carry like scandal," Jonas muttered. At the pulpit, Mayor Tilson banged his walking stick for quiet. "Order, friends. We gather civil." He cast Caleb a pointed glance that made the sheriff the unspoken defendant. Tilson cleared his throat. "Fire in the stables, signal shots in the night, a child sick with fever, yet the jailhouse shelters the cause of discord. One stranger brings peril to our doors. Sheriff, we request an accounting." Caleb stepped forward, boots echoing. "Russell Pike hired roughs, set that blaze. He sits in my cell. Miss Millen risked her life dousing flames." Tilson's gaze flicked away. "A claim without witness." "Jonas saw," Caleb said. All heads turned. Jonas swallowed, beard bristling. "I did," he admitted, voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Saw Pike's torch in his fist." Murmurs rolled through the pews, but Tilson held up a hand. "Regardless, our resources thin. Extra mouths." "One mouth," Caleb corrected. "A mouth that works and mends." He swept the room with a level stare. "You want to cast stones, cast them at the man who burned your feed. You toss her out, you strip this town of the one soul tended the sick boy while you argued." The boy's father, eyes red, shoulders slumped, looked at his boots. A hush fell that Tilson struggled to break. He banged the stick again. Snow shook from rafters, dust drifting like winter inside. "Proposal stands," Tilson said. "Vote at dusk, expulsion or clemency. Sheriff, we expect your compliance." Caleb's fists unclenched slowly. He gave no answer, only turned and walked out into the cold. Sarah hadn't been idle. With Pike's taunts echoing, she'd inventoried the shelves: 3 sacks of flour, dwindling beans, 3 boxes of rifle cartridges. She was counting candles when the hinge creaked. She swung the rifle up, only to lower it as Caleb stepped in, snow beating his shoulders. "How bad?" she asked. "Dusk vote. They'll come." He shucked his coat, eyes hard. "Pike's riders are still out there. If town turns mob, gang'll use the confusion." She moved aside as he began pulling spare rifles from the rack, checking chambers, counting rounds. Under the lamplight, the scar on his forearm looked red and new despite the years. Sarah fetched her mended blanket, clipped it into strips, makeshift bandoliers for shells. Caleb watched her tie one across her broad chest, admiration plain but unspoken. "You sure?" "Tin can fence," she reminded softly, a spark in her eyes. He almost smiled, but Russell's voice grated from the cell. "Romantic fools! They'll gut you both." Caleb strode to the bars. "Name your riders, Pike. Call 'em off and stand a chance at mercy." Pike leaned into lamplight, swelling bruise shadowing his cheek. "Mercy's for thin women and weak men. I owe debt. They collect tonight, Sheriff, and you can't shoot winter itself." Caleb turned away. Pike whistled a tuneless fragment, as if already carving epitaphs in his mind. Towards evening, a hush thicker than any sermon draped the street. Snow had stopped, leaving crusted drifts that cracked under step. Torches bobbed from the church toward the square, Tilson leading, Bible held high more as shield than scripture. Men carried shotguns they'd not fired since the war, women gripped lanterns with hands that shook. A ragged procession of fear. Caleb stood on the boardwalk, Henry rifle across his arms. Sarah beside him held the revolver low, fingers straight, eyes forward. When the crowd stopped 10 paces away, Tilson's breath puffed around words that quavered despite his raised chin. "Sheriff, duty requires you relinquish the woman for escort beyond town limits." "You mean dump her in a snowdrift?" Caleb said. "Expulsion," Tilson pressed, voice cracking. "By vote." Caleb chambered around with deliberate click. "Law says no mob strips a citizen's liberty without trial." "She's no citizen," someone shouted from the rear. "She's under my protection," Caleb answered. "That makes her Dry Creek, same as any." A thunder of hooves cut the reply. 6 riders burst from the alley mouth, kerchiefs over faces, pistols up. Torchlight flared off steel. The crowd scattered, screams tearing the fragile truce. Caleb swung the rifle up, fired once. A rider toppled, snow pluming crimson. Another bullet whined past Sarah's ear. She ducked, steadied, squeezed. Her shot shattered the lantern hanging over the undertaker's door. Glass rained sparks, forcing 2 riders to veer. Chaos churned. Tilson tripped, lantern skidding. Jonas yanked him behind a trough. The boy's father dragged his son from the church steps into shadow. In the caged silence before another shot, Sarah heard Russell laughing, crazed delight echoing from the jail window. Caleb fired again, pump quick, shoulders braced. A second horse screamed, bucked its rider. The remaining 4 regrouped near the livery, firing into air to herd townsfolk away from their line of sight. One barked an order, voice thick with plain slang, then wheeled toward the jail. Caleb grabbed Sarah's arm, pulled her behind the post holding up the porch awning. "1 lantern left," he muttered. "Shoot it when I move." She nodded, pulse steady. Caleb broke right, drawing the riders' muzzles. Sarah rose, took the lantern in her sights, squeezed. Flame burst as glass blew, plunging half the street into darkness. Confused shots sparked wild. Caleb dropped to one knee, his muzzle flash slicing night. A rider pitched sideways, thudding into snow. The last 2 fled for open ground. Caleb knelt, breathing hard, watching their forms shrink into moon-silvered drifts. Over the churned street, hush fell again, broken only by the whimper of wind-testing boards. Tilson crawled from behind the trough, face chalk white. He took in the bodies, the broken lanterns, the woman standing with spent revolver smoking faintly in her hand. Words failed him, awe or shame, Sarah couldn't tell. Jonas strode forward, shovel still in grip. "Sheriff's right," he told the mayor. "She stays. Town's breathin' because of her." One by one, heads nodded, grudging, slow. The murmur grew, shifting from fear into something heavier but honester, acknowledgement. Caleb exhaled, rifle lowering. Snowflakes began again, silent and soft, as if night itself had decided the matter closed. He turned to Sarah. She wiped soot from his cheek, thumb gentle against the rough line of his scar. Neither spoke. Words had never carried as far as the ringing hush where the mob had stood, then faded, leaving only the two of them upright in the glow of a single surviving lamp. Wind slithered through the broken boards of the livery like a restless animal, carrying the scent of kerosene and singed horsehair. Caleb's boots crunched across the churned snow, rifle tucked close, eyes sweeping the main road that glimmered dull beneath a sky thick as pewter. Sarah shadowed him, revolver heavy in her pocket, cold biting through her mended coat. Every window flickered with lamplight now, houses that had shunned her days ago suddenly watchful, curtains trembling each time a branch cracked under ice. Jonas jogged up, breath puffing wide. "Tracks head north," he whispered, snow clinging to his beard. "2 riders peeled off after the ruckus. Could be fetchin' reinforcements." "How long?" Caleb asked. "By nightfall, maybe less if they push their stock." Caleb's jaw tightened. He scanned rooftops, every chimney plume a reminder of lives depending on thin walls and thinner luck. He motioned Sarah and Jonas inside the jail. Pike's laughter drifted down the hall, brittle as icicles. "Your little show bought you an hour, lawman," Pike drawled, shackles rattling as he sat up on the bunk. "They'll ride back meaner, and the decent folks will hand you over to save their hides." Caleb ignored him, unlocking the weapons cabinet. Jonas hefted a double barrel, snapped it open, checked the loads. Sarah fetched spare lanterns, trimming wicks with quick strokes of the knife Pike had mocked her for carrying. "You don't have to stay," Caleb said quietly to Jonas. The big man shrugged. "Stable's half burnt, stock's near froze. Ain't much to lose now." Sarah met Caleb's gaze steady. "If we run, Dry Creek's finished. Pike knows it, those riders know it. So do we." Caleb granted a single nod. "All right. We set lines here." They worked wordless. Jonas hammered iron rings into joists, threaded a bell wire across the street to the mercantile porch, an alarm for hooves. Sarah melted tallow, poured it into glass jars, strips of cloth for makeshift bombs. Caleb distributed cartridges in quiet bundles along the sill, each stack memorized. The routine settled over them like prayer, familiar, grim, necessary. Mid-afternoon snow returned in earnest, swirling thick as smoke. The bell on the wire chimed once, faint, then again. Caleb pressed a finger to his lips, slid to the window. Through white haze, 3 shadows advanced, horses walking slow, riders hunched under slickers crusted in rime. One raised a carbine, shot into the air. The crack echoed off false fronts, a summons and a warning. Caleb stepped onto the boardwalk, Henry leveled. "Town's closed," he called, voice carrying flat in the hush. The lead rider pushed back his hood, revealing a scar puckered from ear to jaw. "Not to us, Sheriff. We're just come for what's owed. Debt's sitting in my cell. You deal with him, not the town." Scarred man grinned, teeth yellow. "Debt's paid in cattle and coin. Or blood. Bring the woman and we ride out soft." Caleb's reply was the Winchester bucking once. Snow burst beside the lead horse's foreleg, close enough to scorch hair. The beast reared. The outlaw cursed, fought for seat, then wheeled away, retreating into the white. 2 shots answered, plank above Caleb's head splintering, but by the time smoke cleared the riders were gone, swallowed by flurries. Inside, Jonas exhaled a low whistle. "That invite's gonna bring the pack." "Let them come," Caleb said. "We finish it here." They barricaded the street side of the jail with overturned desks, sacks of beans layered against the lower wall. Sarah filled lanterns, wedged them into niches where flame would throw silhouettes off their true mark. Pike watched, eyes narrowing with each preparation. You intend to fight an army with 2 farmers and a fat seamstress? He sneered. Sarah kept her back to him. Army? Thought you hired a handful of boys. Can't count either? Pike's chain clanged as he lunged, but shackles yanked him short. He spat, a dark drop on straw. When they drag your body through the mud, you remember these words. Caleb shut the cell door on the threat, locked it twice. Gray bled into black. Snow muted every step, every breath. Sarah crouched by the side window, revolver resting on the sill, thumb finding the notched hammer by feel. Across the room Caleb sat against the wall, rifle balanced on bent knee, face unreadable in lamplight. Jonas paced once, twice, then settled, shotgun over his shoulder. Outside, nothing but the sough of wind through eaves. The bell wires shrieked, snapped. Hoofbeats thundered, muffled by the drift but many, unmistakable. Lantern light trembled on the log walls. Caleb took a deep breath, slow, centered. Remember positions, he murmured. Sarah nodded, pulse steady, sight lining with the doorway hinge. Jonas crouched behind a crate of potatoes, barrel angled toward the lower half of the entrance. Hooves halted. Silence clamped down. Then a voice, farther back, amplified by the still. Sheriff! Toss out the woman and the thief! You've got 30 heartbeats. Caleb replied by firing into the night, his muzzle flash a brief sun. A scream followed, their torchbearer falling. In that instant lanterns arced from Caleb's hand and Sarah's, shattered in the snow, oil flared, a ragged wall of orange forcing the gang out of darkness. Suddenly every rider was a stark shape, targets. Jonas opened with both barrels. 2 shapes toppled. Sarah's revolver spoke twice in clean rhythm. One rider dropped, leg tangled in stirrup, horse dragging him in panic circles. Return fire smashed a window, splinters whipped Sarah's cheek, warm blood trickling. She shifted, calm, reloaded. The outlaws sought cover behind a water trough, but firelight betrayed them. Caleb's Henry cracked, pumped, cracked again. Another figure folded. A guttural cry rose from the gang's rear. Scar stepped through flame glare, rifle braced. Bullets hammered the jail facade, punched holes through shutter planks, thudded into the bean sacks. Jonas took a slug to the shoulder, staggered back cursing through clenched teeth. Sarah dragged him behind the stove, tore open his coat, pressed cloth against the wound. Wood chips rained, stovepipe rang from a ricochet. Caleb crawled along the inner wall, slapped fresh cartridges into the Winchester. He counted silhouettes, still 4, maybe 5. Outside wind whipped the fire low, shapes blurred in smoke. Boots pounded on the porch. Door hinges shrieked as weights slammed. Caleb spun, fired point blank through wood. A shout answered, then a body crashed against the snow-dusted boards. Scar kicked the panel, splintered it inward, burst through with pistol blazing. Caleb dove behind the desk. Bullets shattered glass, whined past iron bars. Pike shouted, half laugh, half terror. Kill 'em, Scar! Open the damn cell! Sarah snatched the fallen keys, slid them across the floor into the shadows just as Scar spotted her. He swung the pistol. She flung herself sideways, thumb snapping the revolver hammer. The report stitched fire across the room. Scar jerked, grimace twisting as blood bloomed over his coat. He fired back wild. Lamp glass shattered, oil cascading flame across the crate. Jonas, teeth gritted against pain, lifted his shotgun one-armed and rammed the stock into Scar's ribs. The bandit folded, wheezing. Caleb rose, rifle muzzle to Scar's temple. Move and I bury you. Outside, hoofbeats retreated, the gang breaking, leader down. Sarah limped to the threshold, watched riders disappear into sheets of falling snow, their will dissolved. Jonas sagged beside the stove, blood seeping through makeshift padding but grinned fierce under his beard. Inside the cell Pike raged, fists white on bars. You think this fixes things? Debts stay owed. Sarah picked the keys from the ashes, held them up. Debts paid in choices. Yours are spent. Caleb slammed the door on Scar, locked it beside Pike's. Jonas hissed as Sarah bound his arm with cloth torn from her shawl. Stable can burn to ashes now, he murmured. Worth it. Caleb doused the small flames licking across the crate, then leaned his rifle against the desk, shoulders trembling with released tension. He looked to Sarah, cut above her cheekbone crusted red, eyes bright, steady as ever. "Town won't forget tonight," he said. "Neither will we," she answered. Footsteps sounded outside, hesitant then firm, Tilson and half the council approaching under flickering lanterns. Their faces, carved by cold and fear, took in the bullet-scarred doorway, the two prisoners snarling behind iron, the woman with blood on her cheek still holding an empty revolver like a hymn-book. The mayor removed his hat, snowflakes melting on a forehead lined with shame. Caleb's gaze never left Sarah as he spoke. "Debt's settled. She stays." The councilman nodded, words unnecessary. In the hush that followed, Sarah set the revolver on the table, flexed fingers stiff from recoil. Caleb touched her shoulder, just once, a silent vow. Wind eased outside, snow drifted gentler, as if night finally exhaled. Inside, the jailhouse smelled of powder smoke, oil, and pine, not of defeat, but of something forged hot and enduring. Caleb leaned on the split-rail fence 3 miles east of Dry Creek, boots half sunk in thawing mud, watching the swollen creek shoulder past ice. Wind carried the smell of wet earth and cedar pollen. Somewhere upstream a cowbell clanged, irregular, like a rusty clock refusing strict hours. Sarah knelt beside a young sapling, her skirts pinned back, hands deep in soil that oozed between her fingers. She pressed the root ball firm, tamped it, and sat back on her heels, breath misting in the mild air. Caleb flicked ash from his cigarette, studied the narrow tree. "Red maple fight to live here," he said. She wiped her palms on her apron. "Everything fights out here. Better when it has company." She brushed hair from her eyes, leaving a smear of dirt across her cheekbone she did not bother to hide. He exhaled smoke toward the creek. "Folks talk. Say you're planting half the valley? Just 4 trees." She rose, stretching a back still bruised by winter's labor. "Shade for cattle, color for the eyes. A promise the snows won't swallow us again." Caleb's gaze dropped to her boots, mud-caked and sturdy as any man's. He towed another seedling waiting at his feet, roots wrapped in burlap. "You name them, too?" "Only after they grow." She met his glance, soft challenge dancing there. "You riding patrol or thinking too loud?" "Thinking's part of patrol." He ground the cigarette under heel, shoveled a shallow hole. "Town feels different. Silence can do that." She passed the sapling to him. Their fingers brushed, rough skin meeting coarse burlap. He set the tree upright, covered roots with careful scoops. They worked without wasted speech, just grunts, the susurrus of creek water, meadowlarks trilling overhead. The kind of quiet that hangs easy after bullets and fire have spent themselves. When the last mound was patted flat, Sarah straightened, hands on hips, surveying the thin sentinels lining the bank. Caleb stepped beside her. Early sun caught the scar on his hand, now pink and pliant, softer against healed skin. She traced it with a thumb, light as breath. "Does it still burn?" she asked. "Not when you touch it." His voice sounded rougher than the trail gravel, but steady. He cleared his throat. "Council agreed. Pike's property goes to auction next month. Town split on the money, but they know who swung the hammer when it counted." "I want none of it," she said. "Neither do I." He reached in his coat, produced a small velvet pouch, blue once, now faded near gray. He held it out. She didn't take it. "What's that?" He shrugged. "Ring belonged to my mother. She planted black-eyed Susans every spring no matter the drought. Says something about stubborn hope. You're asking?" Her voice was level, maybe softer than the creek's gurgle. "I'm offering. Not payment, not charity. Just a place at my table, a name beside mine on town rolls." He swallowed. "Truth is, I'm tired of sleeping with my boots by the door, waiting to ride alone." She opened the pouch, tipped the ring onto her palm. Simple gold, nicked on the edge, fitting for hands that worked. She tried it, settled snug between knuckles, winked in the new sun. She curled her fingers, turned the hand, considering. "Table's small," she said. We'll build a bigger one. She glanced at the line of saplings. Need fence posts first. Jonas already promised cedar. Caleb nodded, an exhale of relief disguised as agreement. We'll start tomorrow. She slipped the ring off, returned it, tightening the drawstring. Then ask me tomorrow night, after the first post is set. A promise ought to sweat a little. He smiled, wide enough to show the boy he once had been. Fair bargain. He tucked the pouch away. Town's expecting us for Sunday supper. Tilson insisted. Tilson wants everyone to see the jailhouse patched up. Make peace with your coffee, too. He'll choke on it, same as always. Caleb turned toward his horse, reins tied to a fence stake. Ride back together? I'll walk. She lifted her face to the breeze. Ground soft. Wants footprints. He mounted, gathered the reins, but didn't move. Leave before dusk. Creek rises fast. Won't outrun me. She touched the nearest trunk, steadying it against the breeze. Go on, Sheriff. Someone might need law back there. He wheeled the horse, trotted off, glancing once over his shoulder. Sarah watched until man and horse shrank to dun specks on the ridge, then knelt again, pressing fingers into earth around each fragile stem, whispering silent things only soil understands. By the time she returned, the road lanterns were lit, halos glowing smoky amber. Children kicked a hoop down the street, skirting mud puddles that mirrored pink clouds overhead. Sarah stepped onto the boardwalk. A woman, Mrs. Green, seamstress, paused, dipped her chin in greeting. Sarah answered with the same small gesture, and the acknowledgement felt larger than applause. At the jailhouse door she heard humming. Inside, Caleb stood at the stove, stirring a pot that smelled of venison and wild onion. His coat was gone, sleeves rolled high, scar turned soft gold in lamplight. He lifted the spoon for her to taste. She sipped, nodded approval, and took the ladle. He set the table, 2 chipped plates, tin cups, a bouquet of early plum blossoms in a jar where wanted posters had once been tacked. Her coins, the wages Jonas paid, rested beside her plate, small stack bound by twine. She left them there. Tomorrow they would buy cedar. They ate slow. Outside, a wagon rattled past, hooves muffled in slush. Inside, spoon against tin was music enough. Later, Caleb fetched the blue pouch again, placed it between them on the table, said nothing. Sweat still dampened his collar from digging. Sarah untied the string, slipped the ring on, kept stirring the stew so its scent filled the room. Caleb reached across, covered her free hand with his, rough warmth-threading fingers that had known winter's scorn. She did not move away. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves, tapping rhythm on the sill. In that rhythm was a promise, unwritten like most worth keeping, that trees would rise, fences hold, and 2 scarred souls could stand the seasons side by side, roots intertwined beneath a sky wide enough for stubborn hope.